All right, and welcome to the Rebuild Health and Fitness podcast today. I'm obviously joined by my co-host, Sean Carroll.
Thank you very much, sir.
And today, we're very excited. We have Jeff Ash on. So we're going to be talking about feeding your families, feeding the younger generation. So Jeff is a father of two daughters. Am I correct?
Yes.
So
both adults now.
Are they? How old?
Yeah. 20, almost 26 and almost 24.
Yeah, wow.
So one's married.
How old are you, Jeff? Don't mind me asking.
I turned 50 this year.
Ooh,
so
I tell you what, you're a picture of health. Jeff is a MNU certified nutritionist and personal trainer. So Jeff has a deep passion for learning and applying knowledge and educating others, which is where I've come across Jeff as well and find him so interesting. His dedication to providing the best, most up-to-date, relevant, evidence-based information is the driving force, I would say, behind his success. And that's why we're super excited to have him on the podcast here. And Jeff is on a mission to help sort of individuals and their families transform their relationship with food and develop healthy bodies, minds, and attitudes. So Jeff, you also run a podcast called Transform Your Nutrition, which we will link. Really good podcast, and has a nutrition program set out to help kids and teams thrive with their food into the future. So this is going to be a big, deep conversation, I feel. But welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here. So always excited to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, super interesting. Like I said, for our demographic and our target market, it's going to be pumping, especially for two, Sean is a parent now as well. And I have two little ones as well. And there's always that sort of battle, even as nutritionists, it's like I believe that I know what is right, but you're so ingrained with how you were brought up in certain ways as well, which is quite hard to get past.
Well, yeah, it's such a big topic because every parent wants to do what's right for their kids. And if something's not working, there's often so much self-doubt that arises in the parents and so much worry that comes from that, which is, again, another challenge in itself.
Yeah, it really is. And I had a question just a couple of days ago from somebody who reached out over Instagram and said, my daughter, when I look at her, she's much smaller than her peers, and I'm concerned. She only weighs X amount and this kind of thing. And well, the weight that she was at was actually right in what would be considered, quote, normal for that age group. But she was concerned because she didn't look like the other kids. She looked smaller. And so she was concerned about that. And as parents, that's kind of what we do. We compare. It's really easy for us to compare our kids, whether they're smaller than the average kid or larger. And then we start to worry.
Yeah, just a bit off topic already. Yeah, like my son Alfie, he was like, up until when he was one, he was always he's so young, but there was no worry there. But he was always like in the bottom 20th percentile for his height, but in the 90th percentile for his weight. So just gave birth to a ball. He was pretty much a ball. You know what I mean? He's getting so. Jeff, take us back a little bit. Tell us a bit about your background, how you got started in nutrition, and what led you down the route to helping sort of families, improve their relationship with food.
Yeah, well, the way that I got into nutrition as a professional was, I think, the way that a lot of us did. We just got really interested in fitness, really interested in building up our own body. I got into doing some bodybuilding stuff and did one of those bodybuilding.com transformation challenges and the works where you get all kinds of bad nutrition information and from other people. But it just really kind of got me excited about it. And I've always been interested in athletics and sports. I played baseball in high school. I was a competitive rock climber back in the late 80s, early 90s. And so it's always been something that I've enjoyed. So I've always enjoyed being active and did competitive karate also. And so I guess that in conjunction with then really the bodybuilding thing caught me really interested in it, because learning how the body works and how you can manipulate things to improve the way that your body performs, looks, and that kind of thing. And I guess that kind of drove me into pursuing it. And what was interesting, though, is that I really shifted after I got really into the education aspect of it. I really started developing a passion for families and children. And I think a lot of that came from, I've always had this passion for working with kids and families, because I think when you start off young, you can make such an impact before they get broken. So a lot of people that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, they've been through different things related to nutrition, health, fitness that's really damaged them in different ways in their relationship with food and all of those things. And so, kind of long story short, just coming back to that and saying, you know what, if we can prevent kids from having an issue in the first place, then we don't have to try and resolve those issues when they're an adult, and they can really thrive better.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
You know, obviously having a lot of nutrition clients ourselves, and
Mhm.
I would not say I'm an expert in children's nutrition, hence why, you know, we get people that are. Even though they've got problems that are ingrained from their childhood, they're still unsure, so they'll still lead that same way, you know. So let's start with like the importance of like language around children in terms of like health, fitness, nutrition. You know, like as I said, we see this problem later in life, but at the crux of it, we probably don't catch it early enough.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I think that's something that it's really easy for us as parents to overlook. And we, it's really easy for us to just talk without thinking of exactly how that could possibly impact our kids. So, for example, if you're talking about, mommy's not going to have dessert today because she had a big lunch and she's trying to lose weight, or it's not on my diet, and seemingly harmless kinds of things and well-meaning. Nobody, I mean, there's no ill intent there. They're not trying to convince their kid they should diet. They're just sort of casually mentioning what they're doing. And the thing with kids is that the way their brains are working, especially younger, they're very concrete. They can't think abstractly. So when they hear mom say something about the size or shape of her body in a negative way, then they think, oh, if mine doesn't look a certain way, then I should do something about it. If I don't look like the other kid, or if I think that I look fat when I look in the mirror, and the kid doesn't really understand that, you know, it's just a normal development process for them to put on additional body fat, or for their stomach to stick out a little bit. But they hear mommy talking about her stomach sticking out, or dad talking about his stomach sticking out, and then now they think, oh, well, mine shouldn't do that either. And so they don't have that capability of really distinguishing between what is a valid concern and what's just normal growth. And so those kinds of things, I guess, are some of the key things that we have to be really careful of with language. So really one of the best things you can do is just a general approach where you just don't talk about your body in a negative way at all. So you don't say, these pants make my butt look big. Oh, I feel so fat today. Just those little comments that are so easy to drop here and there. If we can be really conscious to try and speak more positively about our body, celebrate, you know, you get a PR at the gym, tell your kids all about that. Oh, I did 225 on deadlift today. I'm so excited. So you tell your kids about that, rather than saying, hey, mommy lost 2 pounds, or daddy lost 5 pounds, or whatever. And those are so we don't celebrate the things that maybe shouldn't necessarily be celebrated in the minds of our kids, but we do celebrate those good, positive kinds of things.
Yeah, it's so true. We've spoken about it a number of times, like how much our words can create our reality, and we probably don't put it into the context of like how much that flows on to our kids, and even like other people's kids who are around us as well. Because it's not just our kids we interact with. You know, everyone's got cousins with kids, or nieces and nephews, so it can create, like, you know, your one sort of sly negative comment that, even though you don't think it's, you know, too bad, can be interpreted a whole different way by someone else,
right?
A younger child.
Yeah, and with the powerful influence of our culture and society already bombarding our kids with this impossible ideal that they should be, you know, striving to achieve with the size and shape of their body, and many cases not even realistic. You know, all the airbrush stuff that you see on Instagram and magazine covers, and so anything that we can do to give them a positive message around body image and food also. You know, you see the same thing, clean eating. Oh, that's junk food. You shouldn't eat that, or you need to avoid that. And what we know, and we'll probably talk about this later on, is that when you start using that kind of language with kids, and when you use restriction, lots of restriction, it tends to have the exact opposite effect of what you were hoping to accomplish with it, and it backfires. It's some of the one of the key factors in development of eating disorders is this negativity towards certain kinds of foods and restriction, and so so it's well worth prioritizing those little things. And it's really cool. I've been seeing it in my sister-in-law with my 2 young nephews. I have a 3-year-old nephew and a 6-month-old. and watching her. And what's really cool with her too is that she makes sure other people are aware of what their policy, so to speak, in the house is about talking about things. So if you speak in a way that they're trying not to do, she'll just lovingly let you know, hey, here's how we're approaching this situation. And I think it's really good. And so
Yep.
it really is, and it's made such a difference in him. It's really cool to watch him grow up like that.
I think that's a really interesting point you made about eating disorders, and I'm not going to into it too much, but a lot of it does start from restriction. I think a lot of people are confused. They think it's from this overconsumption and this weight gain, and
Right.
that's where it comes from, where it's not. A lot of it is down to the restrictive nature of how they grew up.
Yeah, it's amazing how what a restrictive mindset and what restricting yourself from eating certain foods and even eating enough food, how that actually backfires. It's amazing, and it's been researched. So it's not just just me saying, hey, random stuff about my feelings about this. It's been really heavily researched, and time and again we see that those are the key factors to developing, especially binge eating disorder and bulimia. Those are very highly related. Binge eating is the binges, and bulimia has the compensating behavior of purging. So, yeah, it's or even just binging behaviors too.
Yeah, and another thing was about language is that I'm probably on this other path. We see obviously clients, we tell them not to track around their foods or just be mindful of what they're doing. If they're weighing in, let's not to make it like an overconscious thing around their families. Like try and keep it to themselves a little bit. And I know people like open and honesty, but even with food, like with Alfie, my youngest, he's really into superheroes. So he's like, how do I get strong? And I'm like, let's eat your food. You know what I mean? If you want to get strong, but then I'm like, maybe am I going too far with the strength thing as well? You know what I mean? It's like, where's this balance? Am I pushing this? If you want to get strong, you need to eat your food. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's tough.
Well, what's really good, and maybe this would be a good time to transition into some of the, like, one of the models or frameworks that I think works really well with kids. But what you're talking about there, I think, is fantastic, because you are encouraging him to eat, and that's something that our diet mentality that we see in our culture, it almost tells us to restrict, don't eat too much, rather than saying make sure you're eating enough. And it's just that subtle little change in mentality that can make a big difference. And so you're encouraging him, hey, you need to eat to get strong. And so he knows, hey, well, yeah, food, that's important. Depending on their age, you can talk about different things like different foods. They can't really grasp protein when they're like elementary school or younger. That's a hard thing to wrap their mind around. But you can say, fish is good for helping your muscles grow strong, and chicken is good for helping your muscles grow, and fruit is great for giving you energy, and bread, and those kinds of things. So you can take those categories and give them a bit more of a kind of a concrete thing that they can wrap their head around, instead of food groups. Is this part of the whatever food group? And they're confused oftentimes with that.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what is our responsibility as adults when it comes to sort of feeding nutrition? So I believe, just looking through your stuff, like you call it the division of responsibility. So can you explain what that is?
Yeah, it's a really simple concept. It's kind of hard to implement it because so many of us have a very different mindset, but it's really a very straightforward kind of concept. And it's based on a trust relationship between the parent and the child. So the child is trusting the parent is going to do their job well, consistently, and not cross over into their job. And then the parent is going to trust that the child's innate capabilities of regulating their food intake, that they'll be able to do that, because our bodies do have this amazing system. Our appetite, our hunger, our satiety, all the hormones going on. When we don't interfere with that or disrupt it, things work really well. And kids have an amazing way of regulating their food intake if we don't get in the way of it and mess it up for them. So the division of responsibility in feeding it's a concept that was kind of codified or put into kind of a framework and model by Ellen Satter. And she has been around for a long, long time. She's a family therapist and registered dietitian. And in this model, she's divided up the responsibilities of the parent and the child in the feeding relationship. And so the responsibilities of the parent is what, where, and when. So the parent then is responsible for what is going to be offered at each mealtime. That makes sense because we're the ones that buy the food. We know what makes a good balanced meal. And this is where our understanding of nutrition can come in. So we can apply our knowledge that protein is good for you, that fiber is good for you, and put together our meals in such a way that encourages the kids to eat in a, quote, healthy kind of manner. The when is also another really important thing for kids, and that's they need some consistency in the schedule of their feeding time. So especially young kids, they really need to eat every 2 or 3 hours, or they start start going crazy. And it's different, each kid's different. Some kids can go longer periods, but in general, every 2 to 3 hours is a good rule of thumb. Once they're toddlers and older, babies, that's a different story, but we won't go into that here. But with that, setting up a consistent feeding schedule, and that's part of that trust relationship. So the kid knows mom's always going to feed me. I'm never going to get super hungry. I'm never going to starve. Mom and dad are going to give me food. They're going to make sure it's there, available, and at predictable times. So they also know when their next meal is coming. So if they're getting a little hungry and it's 30 minutes before meal, they know, hey, it's in 30 minutes, no big deal. So that's the when part. And then the where part, typically it works well if you can get them away from the activities, get them sitting down at a table. It has a really powerful impact to just get them to sit down and focus on their food, because their role and responsibility of the child, and this is where it gets a little scary for parents, is that the child decides whether they're going to eat. You're like, what? They decide if they're going to eat?
Yep.
Yeah, they decide whether they're going to eat and how much. And so we're not to interfere with that. So one of our responsibilities in the what is offered is we want to make sure we're offering a couple of things that the kid is familiar with, comfortable eating, and that they can make sure that they can eat to fullness and satisfaction. And so the child knows that whenever they get to a meal or a snack, they're going to have plenty to eat. They're not going to leave the table starving if they don't eat their broccoli, whatever. And that really builds this trusting relationship, so that then they're much more likely and willing to try new and unfamiliar foods when you do bring those out. So again, you provide some that they're familiar with, maybe some new ones that they've never tried, and then you just allow them to eat what's there, and you also let them kind of explore the food. So sometimes kids like to sniff it, lick it. They won't chew it. And this is where we want to make sure that we're not putting pressure on them. And you may have seen one of my posts this week. I did one on how positive kinds of things can even be pressure in that feeding relationship. So we want to try and avoid any kind of pressure, whether it's praise like, oh, good job eating your broccoli, those kinds of things, because it seems harmless, but now we're saying, oh, you're a good boy if you eat broccoli. And so now they eat the broccoli because they want to get the praise, and not because they've learned to enjoy the broccoli. So, and it's interesting, and you've probably seen this coaching people, is they have these weird ways of looking at food later on as adults, and it all stems back to these different kinds of things that they experience, whether it's positive pressure or negative. So to kind of wrap that up, you don't want to pressure them to eat too much, like no cleaning the plate kind of thing. No 2 more bites. Definitely, you don't want to bribe them with if you don't eat your broccoli, you don't get dessert. Those kinds of things. Because now you're basically saying, well, broccoli is this gross stuff that you got to stomach down if you want to get dessert. And so it's weird, because the way the kids' minds work, it's just amazing how that impact that it can have.
Yeah, mate, that's so interesting. I want to circle back just to something that you touched on there around like picky eaters. So you said that it's always good to start with something familiar. And what's the best way to start introducing new foods to them? Do they need to see you start eating them, or do you just put it on their plate and don't really say anything about it and see how they go with it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's probably one of the most common questions that we get is, well, my kid's really picky. I can't just let them eat however much they want, because all they'll eat are chicken nuggets and ice cream. And usually when that happens, it's because there's some kind of pressure that's been going on, and that's why they tend to become really picky. And so the good thing is that you can change this, and the younger they are, the easier it is to change. But I've even coached young teenagers, and had them and seen them change their mindset around some of these things. But yeah, so with picky eaters, it's really important too. And that's where giving them something familiar helps them feel relaxed when they come to a meal. So they come to the meal, they're not worried, what are mom and dad serving me tonight? Am I going to even be able to eat anything? But when they're able to trust that they can go to that meal, knowing that there's something there they're familiar with, then they're more likely to try it. This is also where the time thing comes in, the when aspect of it, that consistent schedule. One of the things that can help with is ensuring that the kids are arriving at the meal with a certain level of hunger. Because if you let them graze all day, then they never really get hungry.
Yeah.
And so when they get to a meal, they may not even really be hungry. And so there's not much incentive to try something different. And so if you allow them to experience a little bit of hunger and that kind of thing with that timing, then they arrive at meals ready to eat. And then when you don't pressure them, what you were saying about they need to see you eat it, it's exactly what we need to do. We need to model it for our kids. So we find that kids in this kind of environment tend to end up eating very similar ways to their parents. They're going to develop their own tastes and preferences and that kind of thing. But in general, they're going to end up eating in a very similar way to the parents if there's none of this pressure involved. And part of that's just letting them explore, especially when they're young. You can kind of let them. Some people kind of have in their mindset, I shouldn't let my kid play with their food, but that can actually be a really good way, especially with picky eaters. Let them pick it. Let them, if they want to dip their broccoli in their ice cream, let them do it. It's weird, but if you kind of let them explore it on their own terms, and it's really interesting because we find that, and this is researched also, that sometimes it takes 20 or 30 exposures. It's not uncommon for a kid to a new or unfamiliar food in a neutral pressure environment for them to then finally try it. And in fact, my sister-in-law, I kind of mentioned her earlier this week, she messaged me and said, "Hey, your nephew just ate chicken taco meat for the first time. And I've offered it to him about 10 times and he's never wanted to try it. And today he just went to town on it." So it's really amazing how that happens if we don't freak out, disrupt that, and start pressuring them.
There's so many good points here. I think allowing them to play with their food. A lot of cultures eat with their hands, don't they? Because they want that connection with food straight away. And it's just obviously the Western world use knife and forks. A couple of things that I've noticed, even at daycare, when they have them set timings and they're all eating on this table together, like the kids tend to eat whatever's in front of them. They tend to eat a lot more at daycare as well. And another thing I've read about in the past is like putting everything on the plate at once. So like the dessert will still be there. Everything will still be there. So they find this sort of comfort. So it's not saying, hey, this dessert is better than this. Like these are the foods that we've made for today. And, then they'll start exploring and picking. And of course, obviously, I think the argument there is like, yeah, but he's just going to eat the chocolate cake. But it's like, no, I think we're missing the point a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually something that we do have a lot of parents try that. It's kind of an ideal scenario to have your meal and your dessert served together because it neutralizes the food. They don't view chocolate cake as anything that's forbidden or that should be put up on a pedestal or anything like that. It's just another food to be enjoyed. And I think you can probably attest to this yourself. It's true for me. Some days I'm in the mood for sweets. Other days I'm not.
Every day.
Some days I feel like a salad. Yeah, but other days I do feel like sugar. And so if we can develop that same mindset in our kids, then that's fantastic because then they don't run into that binge restrict cycle where they hold back on the cake. They know cake's not good for me. I shouldn't eat it, or I should minimize how much I eat. And then they avoid it, and then they eat it, and then they feel bad, and all kinds of different things. And so it's really interesting because a lot of parents don't think that that'll work if they put their dessert in there. And at first it may not. When you're working with a family, it often gets, for lack of a better word, worse before it gets better because the child hasn't developed that trust in that relationship yet. The parent hasn't developed the trust yet. So it can, if you start serving chocolate cake with your dinner, your kid may eat just cake and not the chicken. But again, since you decide what's going to be served, you don't have to offer a dessert at every meal. You don't have to offer chocolate cake at every meal. But it's really cool. I've seen it happen with young kids. I have one client who, her 3-year-old, she started serving the dessert with him, and sometimes he eats it. Sometimes he doesn't even eat the dessert because he just loves all the other food. And so it's really cool when you see that.
For sure.
But it's scary.
Sorry. Just going to circle back to when you're speaking about like the positive reinforcement with meals, like, oh, good job eating your broccoli. Obviously, that's something I've done when my son has eaten something, and I'm like, oh, good job, Leo, well done. Like, what should we be saying around mealtime, or is there anything like we need to be wary of in terms of that positive language?
Yeah, and that's a good question too, and that is something that it's really easy for us because we want to praise our kids when they do something that we think is good, and in some contexts there are certain things that we should praise them for. You know, when they accomplish something really good, when they put in a lot of hard work and accomplish something, then we praise them for that. Or when they demonstrate a good, strong work ethic by picking up their room without being asked, then we say, oh, great job. I'm so proud of you for doing that. Food's a different thing though, because it's not really praiseworthy that you ate broccoli when you think about it. And so when we start to do that, then they start to develop a mindset of, okay, I want to get that praise and adoration from mom and dad, because I mean, kids do, they want to please us, especially younger kids, and they want our love and our affection. And if they find that if they eat a certain way, if they eat a certain amount, even too, if they clean their plate, that kind of thing, then they get the praise and affection. Then that can become a real problem over time, as you see. And so the positive reinforcement, again, we can never be perfect.
No. Yeah.
I mean, obviously. So if that's the worst thing you're doing to your kids, you're probably fine. But it's another thing to just kind of think about, really break it down and think, if someone praised me every time that I ate my food at a table, I mean, is that really something that I need to be praised for? So anyway, some of the things that we can say instead is we can ask them questions about it. How was that broccoli? Was that good? Like, let's say they ate the broccoli. Oh, I saw that you put butter on that. How did that taste? How'd you like that new sauce that I put on it? Was there anything that stood out to you? Is that something you would like to have again another time? You can have the conversations around it. And getting curious about it can then help you too going forward with trying new foods. You know, if you find out that they ate it and it was too salty, if they notice that, then you can say, oh, okay, well, maybe if I don't salt it as much, then maybe they'll enjoy it more, and just get a feel for that.
No, I think that's great. Even like, you know, something I've done is like maybe said, well done for trying the new food. Something like that. Or I know like Alfie, he'll eat his vegetables, but he likes to dip it in sauce. It's like, fine, he's still getting the nutrients. There's no, I don't care right here. He's still getting it in his mouth. He's just dipping it in whatever sauce is available.
Yeah, and that's a great way to help them start to learn that. I mean, one of the key things that I think that it's really easy for us to lose sight of is that our kids are novice eaters. They don't know what the heck they're doing. I mean, they have these biological drives to eat. So there's that, but they don't know much about the different foods, and some foods might have a weird texture to them or a weird look to them, and so they're a little bit hesitant to put it in their mouth. And so we have to understand it's just a skill that needs developed, and it's something that as we model as parents, just like we model sharing, we model showing affection to other people, we model how we talk in social situations. The same is true for food. We model how we try different foods and how to respond when there's a food that we don't like. You know, we don't say, ooh, yuck, that's gross. Yeah. So, you know, you definitely correct those kinds of behaviors, so they understand how to be polite, but they can politely decline to eat a food or to finish a certain amount of food.
When it comes to, obviously, I think a lot of parents, including ourselves, adults, were just quite hypocritical at times of things that we say. Like, you know, we know best, you know what I mean? We know best, even though we suck the most. It's like, one of the big questions that's come up repeatedly is parents really want to push their children to finish everything on their plate, even to the point where their kids will say, I'm not hungry because they've only ate very little. And the kids will go, no, you need to. And some people will say it's about, food wastage, or, you've heard the things, there's kids in Africa starving and all this sort of thing. Like how do we, what's the best protocol to use here?
Well, I mean, the first thing to realize is that, like I was saying earlier, kids have this amazing ability to regulate their food intake, and we see it in research, we see it in practice when you watch them. And one of the things that I think part of that can come from is the food wastage, and we can talk about that in a second. But I think parents are also afraid that their kid's not eating enough in some cases, or they're eating too much. And so they look at their child and they're like, oh man, all they had was one chicken nugget and a glass of milk. And that can't be enough. That can't possibly be enough. They can't possibly be full. And yet they may be, because only the child really knows what their energy needs are. We can guess, we can plug it into a calculator and estimate what their energy needs are, but really their body is the best indication of when they need to eat more or less. And even the types of food. I mean, we know from some of the research in different areas, getting geeky here, but like the protein leverage hypothesis, where they hypothesize that if you don't get enough protein, that your body is still going to drive you with hunger until you're getting enough protein, even if you've had adequate calorie intake and those kinds of things. And I think that we need to understand that our kids have those drives in them that drive them to eat certain kinds of foods also, and in certain quantities based on what they need. And so we definitely don't want to interfere with that. And like I said, we might think that we know best in that area, but I can guarantee you we really don't. Now, there's special cases. I mean, I'm not talking about clinical conditions, a kid with cancer. Those are totally different. But the average kid is going to be able to regulate that on their own if there's no pressure. And that's the problem, is that we often say, well, my kid can't control his eating, and so I need to control it for him, when really what we need to do is take a step back and quit stepping on their role, stick to our role of what, where, and when, let them do the role of whether and how much, and then not using those negative comments that we often do, clean your plate, oh, you barely ate anything, or you're eating too much, you're going to get fat, those kinds of comments. And so that's one of the key things there, is just understand that they really do. That's kind of weird to say that. My 4-year-old really knows best on how much to eat. They actually do. It's pretty amazing.
And I suppose that you take that same principle over to, like, if you're worried about your kid getting enough of enough nutrients in, just letting them self-regulate that process. Because I think that's a common thing as well. I think people think, oh, they're not eating their veggies, they're not eating their, not getting enough meat in there, nutrients lacking, proteins lacking. But I think people, again, often get confused with how much kids actually need. They just worry they're not eating enough. But the kids, they're designed to get enough.
Yeah, and a varied diet is probably the best way to do that. And the best way to get a kid to eat a varied diet is to take the pressure off of them, to give them an opportunity to explore new foods without feeling pressure, and then find those that they like. So right now, today, your kid may just eat chicken nuggets and bread, and you may be saying, well, if I just let my kid eat, if I don't put any pressure on him to eat any vegetables, then he's going to get deficient in these things. But if you take a step back and apply these principles, then it can really help them to develop some enjoyment for different things. And there's different approaches that can be used there. But that's definitely one of the best ways to go about that.
Yeah, and the food wastage thing. A few people, like someone, I'm going to ask the questions a little bit later, but someone wrote, he grew up in Texas. So he said, and they were pretty poor, so not eating what they were eating was a bit of an insult. So they were always told to feed, and now he seems to be passing that on to his kids a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a difficult one, especially when there is a food shortage, food insecurity, and when there's minimal food available. And it can make it really difficult. You don't want any any food waste. But one of the best things to do, as far as if you're concerned with food waste, which we all should be. I mean, we should be good stewards of the resources that we have. I mean, that is just kind of being a responsible citizen. It's just you don't have to give them, when we talk about how much, when we say how much the kid gets to decide how much, that doesn't mean they get to heap 5 big spoonfuls of something on their plate, and you just let them do that and then dump 3/4 of it out. You can, and without interfering in this process, you can say, okay, everybody take 1 spoonful to start with, knowing that you can go back for seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths if you need it. But that way you're minimizing the amount that's getting on there. So you're also minimizing the amount that would be wasted if they don't eat it.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a really something that I'll probably take straight away and start doing it at home. That's a really good point. Yeah, people can have as many servings as they want.
Yeah.
You know, and then whatever's left, usually we'll take the leftovers and stuff anyway. So it just allows us to have more for leftover, because I'll eat whatever's left. You know what I mean? I'll take whatever.
So as a parent, and you know, I'm sure this is shared by every parent and or caregiver, if you are starting to develop concerns about, say, your child's weight, if you think they're you know, starting to lead potentially into an unhealthy zone, how do you best deal with this? Because me and James I'm sure obviously sure you share the same views that, you know, children should never track calories or anything like that. Like what sort of strategies would you implement to start helping develop a more healthy lifestyle, leading your child away from potential, you know, childhood obesity leads to adult obesity in most cases? How do we avoid this or mitigate?
Yeah, and that's a really that question is probably the number one question that parents come up with, and I think it's just part of the culture that we're in. Is it's such a big influence. You know, you don't want to get too big. I would recommend a really good book to anybody listening from Ellen Satter that I mentioned. It's Satter, and it's called Your Child's Weight. So easy one to find. It's on Amazon. It's ebook. Really good book that goes over this division of responsibility in detail. It answers a lot of the questions that come up, and she goes real in depth into that specific topic. But in general, when it comes to your child's weight, and you early on said something about your child coming out like a bull. You know, he's for height and weight, he was in the 20th percentile, or for height, he was in the 20th percentile, and then much higher, 80 or 90, I can't remember what you said, but for weight. And so, but he came out that way, and if his growth chart, and you know, your pediatrician will plot this for you, and if the growth chart, if your child is always trending at the 70th percentile or 80th or even 90th or whatever, they may be growing at a rate that is right for them and for their body. That can be really hard for us as parents, because we see percentiles and we often think our kids should be at the 50th. That's the ideal place. And so then our kids at the 70th or 80th or 90th, and pediatricians often will get concerned because they treat it like BMI. You know, your BMI is X, so you need to do something about it. And the same thing with the child's weight. It may be up there, and they say, oh, you need to do something about it, put them on a diet. Problem is you're trying to take a kid who naturally is a bigger kid, or smaller. The same is true for smaller kids that are in the lower percentiles, but we try and force them down to the, you know, quote, normal range. And so when we do that, we're forcing them out of kind of a natural normal growth curve into something that's not really right for their body, or may not be. And so that tends to backfire, and that's one of those determining factors for developing these issues later down the road. So when it comes to weight, that's the first thing. Is your child may not even have a weight problem. So look at that even if you think they do, you look at that growth curve, and if they've always been there, just ease up, and that may be a natural place for them. Also understand kids grow in different ways. So they grow high, you know, they'll grow tall. And some kids, when they're going into a growth spurt where they're sprouting up in height, they eat like crazy, and they just grow, and their body fat, you know, their body composition stays relatively the same, and they just grow taller. Other kids, their body composition changes, they pack on additional body fat, as they're going into that growth spurt. And then when they hit that growth spurt, then it evens out back out again. Again, if we don't interfere. But when we start interfering, then we start really throwing all these wrenches in the works, and it can really cause issues. And so I guess just to wrap it up, the main thing that you want to look for is if your kid's always been at the 70th percentile, let's say, and then suddenly they're up at the 95th. And now that's something to be concerned about. So when you see these sharp spikes or changes in their growth curve, or it goes down, that's when you start to say, I wonder what's going on. It doesn't mean you stick them on a diet. No, that's not the answer, but it's like, hey, let's find out what's actually wrong here. Oh yeah, that's when dad died. Oh, that's when mom and dad got a divorce. Oh, that's when we found out that so-and-so had been abusing the child, or they start getting bullied at school. That address, now you say, okay, well, no wonder something happened. It interfered with the way that they're eating. And so let's address that root issue, not diet them down. And so that's really the best way to deal with those things.
I think obviously physical activity, we've spoke about on the podcast about how important we believe that sport is growing up as well, and just putting putting it somewhere else. Yep. Do you know what I mean? And then I even look, I'm terrible. I'll always go into sport, because every sport needs every shape and size. You know what I mean? There's always something there that can be a lot of more of a positive reach than just like, oh, you need to grow into a smaller frame to suit society or what we believe that we should. Look at the world's strongest man. He's what, 6'10", 200 kilos. You would say that he's pretty, you see a heavy player, right? Front row and prop. Let's go. Yeah. Come on. So there's always that. Yeah. There's physical activity. I think is somewhere to start before having a look at food for sure.
I mean, you look at rugby players and American football players, and you've got everything from the 185-pound wide receivers to the 350-pound linemen. And you look at their bodies, they're not, neither one could get to the other one. I mean, no matter how hard they try, but for some reason we think our kids should be at the average.
Yeah.
And it's just not. I mean, there's so many genetic factors.
So just carrying on, just from what we're talking about now. So how negative can diet culture be so early on, like regardless of body shape?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It gives us such a skewed perspective on our bodies and how we should view them. And we see people being negative about the way that their body looks. You see this is a common one with women who give birth. They're like, oh my gosh, I need to get back to my pre-baby weight. And I understand it. I'm not minimizing that at all. I mean, I understand the feelings, and even not being a woman, I could still wrap my head around that. I mean, I have daughters and have been married and all of that stuff. And so, but yeah, we get this fixation on this idea that, oh, I've got to get that baby weight off, rather than thinking of our body has probably changed some. We just gave birth to a human being. Also, just different life changes and stresses, as our hormones change over time and that kind of thing, our body fat levels are going to change. And so, anyway, with the kids, we just want to do anything that we can to help them not feel negative about their body.
Yeah.
But it's also, this one's a really interesting one. And we've had some good conversations about this, and probably don't have time to delve into it. But if your kid comes home and says, am I fat? And if they are, the typical parent is, no, you're not fat. You're beautiful. Okay. So if you think about that, you're not fat. You're beautiful. Now the kid hears, okay, so fat's not beautiful. And if they hear that a lot, that's where some of those little things can come in and really mess with our heads. So that's just one really obvious example there. And typically though, what you'd want to say is, is ask questions about that. So when those opportunities come up, don't try and like minimize it or spare their feelings or anything like that. Be honest and ask questions. Well, why would you ask that? Did something happen at school? How are you feeling about that? And just really explore those feelings and find out what it is, where it's coming from. And then maybe you can address it without even having to deal with answering the question, am I fat? Yes or no?
I think that's so important. We quite often have that sort of avoidance mindset when it comes to confrontation. And I think more so for kids, like I don't think they, we greatly underestimate how resilient they are. And I think that's such great advice, just leaning into the question a little bit more, exploring it rather than, trying to bat it away quickly in a sort of positive light that, as you said, can be interpreted in a much more damaging way long term.
I think it's from the person as well. The parents, say if they have had a bad relationship, food coming in and their child is coming in and saying this, they start to get triggered from their past trauma to start to react and ask questions of so much emotion. There's probably a little bit of a problem there.
Absolutely.
Keep a level head, like you said, and just ask them questions, but easier said than done, I guess, a lot of the time.
I mean, one thing I'll say is that anybody listening, don't ever feel bad, shameful, guilty for doing any of these things that we're talking about that aren't ideal, because that, just like when you start having guilt and shame around food and stuff, it just perpetuates the problem. When you start beating yourself up over mistakes you make as a parent, then you can't focus your attention on making changes or doing things differently. I mean, that's something that it was really hard for me personally as a parent, because I made a number of mistakes in my first marriage. My first wife passed away in 2010 of cancer, and she was very verbally abusive toward myself and the kids. And there were certain things that I allowed to happen that I shouldn't have. And so I went through, a period of really beating myself up over that. And I should have done it this way. I should have done it that way. What I came to realize was, that I did that stuff wrong. And now going forward, I can talk to my kids and ask them questions and really help them deal with the issues that they went through. And it's been a much better way of moving forward. And we do that with anything. So I do want to encourage parents not to, say, oh, I'm a horrible parent because I'm doing everything you said not to do. Because that is, a lot of us do beat ourselves up like that. And I think that's a really important thing. Just say, oh, you know what? That's one little thing that I think I could actually make that little change. I'm going to try that. You don't have to try all of it at one time or that kind of thing. You can say, you know what, I'm going to try that one little tip that I heard there, and just start making those small changes, and then hopefully see things come along.
Yeah, and I think something you said at the beginning about sometimes things might get a little bit worse before they get better is something that people need to really keep in mind when they're going to try new things. Say when we try any new dieting protocol, really, or with adults or anything that we try, it doesn't mean that it's going to just miraculously work. These things take a little bit of time. There's no one size fits all approach here. Something that you speak about teaching food rather than nutrition. So can you explain that thought process?
Yeah. So talking about with kids, especially younger kids, older kids, you can actually start to talk about nutrition principles and how protein works and the difference between energy from carbs and fat and that kind of thing. But with younger kids, it's better to just focus on the foods themselves, how they were grown, how they're prepared, get them involved in grocery shopping and preparing meals, chopping up some of the vegetables, get them interested in food in general, and just feeling more comfortable and confident around it. That's going to be much more beneficial than teaching them the food pyramid or talking to them about protein and what protein does and all of those things. So that's kind of where I'm going with that, is that you want to encourage the love of, the comfort around, and the enjoyment of different kinds of foods. And when they're younger, actually there's a really good Instagram account called Kids Eat in Color, kids.eat.in.color. And she has a lot of cool visuals, and she'll use little tips and stuff in there. And she'll give some examples of kind of how to talk to different ages about food. So with younger kids, you might tell them that orange foods help with your eyesight. Meat, these meat foods help with make you strong. Whatever you want, however you want to talk about that. Fiber, it's going to make you poop better. And so, kids, especially a little bit older kids, they understand that, and especially boys seem to like to talk about poop and stuff. So you can do stuff like that, but that kind of language where you're keeping it much more concrete instead of abstract, like vitamin A is good for this, vitamin C is good for this. And I think that's what happens a lot in our nutrition curriculums in schools, as they focus on all these different things, they teach the food pyramid, they teach that you need to get all these different vitamins, but they're not really ready to process that and wrap their head around it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Something that we'll use a lot, and I think people are worried about, like, like even like baked beans. High fiber, high protein, tasty. There's always the beans make you, beans make you fart or whatever it is. Like, I sing that to my son, and he loves it. He goes crazy for it, but he'll eat his beans. But people worry then that, oh, it's in sauce, it shouldn't be eaten. It's like, no, come on. There's still a lot of nutrients within that. I've got some questions that were asked from a couple of our members. We have covered a lot of them, and then we'll go into some takeaways. But yeah, it's fascinating so far. Firstly, is we've sort of been through. One of the things, she messaged me then privately. She said, "How do I even get her to put food in her mouth without forcing her? I can give her all the variety in the world, but she flat out refuses to try it. I'm at a point of saying just smell it or lick it. That's how bad it is. Our next port of call is to see someone, but let's see if your podcast." And my reply was, I know that even just having it on their plate and them being able to keep it near or even smelling it or lick it is a pretty good sign. But I would speak to yourself and see what you thought as well. But I think we've touched on it a little bit, but.
Yeah, that's sorry, I muted my dog there.
We like dogs.
Yes. But yeah, that's a really good question. And that's part of where that pressure comes in, because a lot of parents don't realize that they are pressuring their kids. And when they do pressure them, that tends to be one of the things that happens, is that that sort of panic sets in. I can't, they're not eating anything. They won't even try it. But when we relax that, and when our child starts to trust that we're actually not going to pressure them anymore. That's the thing. That's where some of the time, where it sometimes takes a little time, is that you can go to your child, especially if they're a little older, you can explain, hey, you know what? I think that I've been doing some things wrong or not in the best way, and I want to make some changes. And what do you think about this? I had this with a recent client, a 12-year-old, and told them what we were going to be doing, that he wasn't going to be getting on the scale, not going to be put on another diet, that he was going to decide how much and whether he was going to eat. And he got so excited, lit up, high-fived his mom. And so it was really cool to see that, because you could just see that even though his parents were not pressuring by what most people would think of pressure, even just that little bit, he just felt so much more relaxed. And that can be really helpful in that. So implementing that division of responsibility is definitely the first step. Implement that, and then see what happens from there. And it may be that the variety, you just need to try, like you were talking about, sauces on veggies. It may be that include ranch or ketchup or whatever it is that maybe your kid likes at every meal, alongside whatever it is that you're serving. And that may be one way to help them kind of get more familiar. It's also harder not knowing how old the child is, because you can do different things with different ages.
I was just going to say, would it help to include the child in the preparation process? I know with my son, I've tried we're gonna, even though he's only 18 months old, do you want it cut this way, or do you want it cut this way? Should we put it in? He doesn't know what the oven is, but put it in here or put it in the steamer. So he has that sort of freedom of, or illusion of choice kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's probably one of the best ways that seems to work more often than not with most kids. And that's involve them in the shopping, have them pick out things, teach them how to pick out a good piece of fruit or a good vegetable. Ask them, hey, is there anything here you want to try? Let them choose something that maybe you want to try it at a meal, and then also get them involved, even if they're not going to eat it. And if they trust that they're not going to have to eat it, but they're just going to be helping to prepare it for the rest of the family. I know with my oldest one, she was a very picky eater. She still is pretty picky. And but we found that whenever if she cooked it, she would eat it, because it was kind of a pride thing. It's like, I put my effort into this, and I'm at least going to try it. And so she would try it on her own. We didn't even have to force her to do it or pressure her to do it. She was more than happy to at least give it a taste. And even, with cooking too, part of learning to cook is tasting the food and seeing if you put enough salt, if it's if it's cooked all the way. And so those could be ways of helping your kids, helping encourage them also to just broaden their horizons and try some new things.
No, I think that's
fantastic.
I think that's brilliant. I missed that one. There's one here. So this woman, she has a lot of staff, which a lot of them are sort of teen and preteens with, she says, eating disorders, but I'm going to say that's the wrong word in this context. Is there language to avoid, open communication to have with kids, strategies if kids start to have body insecurities?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to talk about size and shape and weight goals, weight loss, dieting. You definitely want to avoid restricting foods that they enjoy. Those, if kids enjoy sweets, you want to make sure that's a regular part of their diet. And that may sound weird to parents, as you're telling me to eat sugar and Doritos and potato chips and whatever it is. But yeah, if that's something that they enjoy the taste of, it's something you want to include on a regular basis, so that when they see those things, it's just natural. They don't feel like they have to go crazy and eat all the chocolate because they never get chocolate, or all the chips because they never get chips, or just guzzle down the soda because you never let them have soda, that kind of thing. But that's where the what and when and where comes in on the parent's job. And so we decide what's going to be made available at different meals. And so we can make sure that they aren't getting soda at every meal or that kind of thing, but be intentional about making sure that they have access to it in a neutral, regular basis, to where it sort of loses its mystique. And so that's one of the things with eating disorders or disordered eating. And the other one is the restriction mindset. You want to avoid anything with restricting. So you don't want to talk about healthy and unhealthy foods. That one's good for you. You need to eat more of that. That one's bad for you. You shouldn't eat that. Yeah. That one's going to make you fat. That kind of language. Those are kind of some of the basics that you want to definitely avoid.
Yeah, I think that's great. Even as adults, we try and give people permission to eat whatever they want, and just because they have that permission doesn't mean that they will choose to eat whatever they want.
Exactly. And that's where I think a lot of people misunderstand one of the principles of intuitive eating, which is unconditional permission to eat. And it's like, oh, well, if I give myself unconditional permission to eat, all I'm going to eat is cake and ice cream. It's like, well, why would you do that? How do you feel when you eat cake and ice cream and that's all you eat? Well, I feel like garbage. So so when you let your kids eat, they'll discover that if you let them eat too much, they find out, oh yeah, when I ate 5 hot dogs and 4 pieces of cake at the birthday party, I felt like garbage. And so you allow them to discover that for themselves, and then they start to regulate those things on their own because they don't like how it felt when they ate that.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. Right, 2 more. So when and maybe what are the signs that it's become more of a concerning pattern of behavior, like it's something that you need to do something more about in terms of like an eating disorder or body image issues?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. The most common eating disorder is binge eating, and then bulimia is kind of a cousin of that. It involves the binging, and so secret eating, hiding food, certainly a dramatic drop in weight would be, or an increase in weight would be something to look at. And again, that's where you don't just try and attack the symptom with a diet or forcing them to eat. That's when it would be good to get somebody evaluated. I don't work with people with eating disorders. That's going to be left to a specialist registered dietitian. But in general, those would be the kinds of things you see if there's lots of negative talk or even self-harm, if they're secretly throwing food away, if they're saying that, using dieting language like, I'm not going to have cake tonight because my coach said that it might make me fat, or I don't want to get fat. Those are the kinds of signs that start to make you start to raise an eyebrow and at least become concerned, or at least curious. You want to ask questions. It doesn't mean the kid's going to develop an eating disorder just because they start asking those kinds of questions or making those statements, but it's certainly a good time to address it before it becomes an issue.
especially when there's so much information, even myself and Sean on our Instagrams, we're talking to adults, but at the same time, like my 13-year-old niece follows me. So she may see things as well. So there's always this balance. When I went home to the UK a few years ago, we went out for pizza that night, and she was I think she was 13 at the time. She said to my mum, she's like, oh, I'm not going to have lunch tonight because we're having pizza later. And in my head, I was like, it made me pretty sad to even hear that. And I had just had a little bit of a conversation with her. But to an adult, sometimes you might go, all right, that's not maybe not the worst thing in the world. So,
or even praise them for it. Oh, good job. That's what my my diet tells me to do that, and that kind of thing. And that can actually be, again, kind of coming back to intuitive eating, which this division of responsibility is sort of a cousin of that. It's similar principles and concepts and the idea around it. But there's nothing wrong with skipping a meal. Like yesterday, I ate a big lunch, Mexican food, a huge plate, all kinds of stuff. And I didn't eat dinner on purpose because my wife even said, are you going to want dinner later? I said, no, I might nibble on something, but I'm not going to eat dinner because I had plenty of food at that meal. And so we can still, and that's kind of a little bit different way of addressing that same issue without bringing in that dieting mentality. So if we skip a meal, we might, and it's obvious to our kids that we're skipping a meal, we may want to be intentional about pointing out why it is that we're skipping a meal, as opposed to, so they don't think that it's because we're restricting for dieting reasons and that kind of thing. So these are just different kinds of things that, I guess, being intentional and thoughtful of how the things that we say may come across to our kids is probably one really good takeaway.
And that's one. So this is of Aaron. So what constitutes a well-rounded lunch for a growing child? Making a lunch like wrap fruit, yogurt, small treat, and only most of it come back? Or are you supposed to tell them they have to eat their lunch if they aren't hungry, which I've already discussed? Or is it better to just give them maybe less food than they should eat?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Definitely give them enough that they can eat to satisfaction. That takes some trial and error to give them enough, but not too much. One way that you can know at a meal if your kids are eating enough is if there's leftovers. Not all the time, but if every dish on the table is empty, then that's an indication that maybe there wasn't enough to eat completely to satisfaction. So it's a consideration. Again, it's not a rule, it's just something to think about. But the same could be said for lunches. So if your kid's coming home famished from school every day, like the first thing they do when they walk in the door is like running to the fridge, and they're just, and it's not just, hey, can I have my snack? But they're like almost frantic about it. Then, maybe I'm not giving them enough in their lunch, or maybe I need to send them with an additional snack to have in the afternoon. And so that would be kind of one way to approach that. One thing with the content of the meal is, and I think you guys know the importance of this, include protein, fat, and carbs in every meal and every snack. And that snack is one that I think it's overlooked a lot, is that we think, oh, let me just give them a handful of goldfish crackers. Well, a handful of goldfish crackers, nothing is wrong with, I don't know if you guys even have goldfish crackers. They're a little orange. Okay. They're a little cheese flavored. Yeah, they look like a goldfish. They're cheese flavored, and they're really popular here with the kids. Just about every kid loves them. But anyway, and that's a common one, or pretzels or something, a handful of those, and they eat that, and then it knocks out their hunger immediately, but it's simple carbs, and it's not going to sustain them until the next meal. And so when you don't give them enough at a snack time to actually sustain them until the next meal, then you're kind of setting them up for failure. And so coming back to lunch, think of protein, fat, carbs. Same with snacks, protein, fat, carbs. Those are going to be the best way to sustain them, because we know carbs hit us pretty quick, spikes our insulin, that knocks down adds to our satiety, knocks out our hunger immediately, but it doesn't sustain. But protein takes a little longer to digest, sustains us a little longer. Same with fat. Fat slows down our gastric emptying a little bit, which means then it's going to sustain us also. So if you combine the three, you get the best of immediate attack on your hunger, sustaining power of the protein and fat. And so that's my number one tip for just the content of the meals. Don't overthink it. I mean, like I said, nothing wrong with including in some of those different treats and processed foods here and there, but
No, I think that's great. And I think as parents, a lot of parents listening, it's just going to come down to, practice, and then obviously just catching yourself when you're doing these things, because they are going to come up again.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's really important. Like,
Mhm.
I've had it in mind where maybe we've had some chicken nuggets, and Alfie's like, he doesn't really like them, and then he wanted some fruit. He's like, I want some strawberries, and I was like, no, you've dinner's there. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, yeah, mate.
Yeah.
Okay, go
straws.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. And again, we use this advice with our adult clients as well. Like, if you're a parent who's listening to this and so many things are resonating with you, don't feel like you need to like rebuild your whole like household routine. Just start with the smallest little thing you think and try that, see how that goes for a bit, and that might be enough.
Yeah, in fact, that's a good point. Definitely, as we're probably coming up on time here, one of the big takeaways is the first thing I start all of the parents with, and I even start my adult clients with this usually because so many of them struggle with it, is set yourself up on a consistent feeding schedule. Not a rigid rule, not that kind of thing, but make sure you're feeding yourself regularly. And that's, for kids, that is such a huge game changer. Just that one thing. Breakfast at the same time each day, a snack at the same time each day, lunch, a snack in the afternoon, usually 3 meals, a couple of snacks. Some kids need 3, some kids, athletes may need 5 or 6. You just so that's something to where we can apply that our understanding of nutrition and physical activity. But yeah, that schedule is one of the best ways. So the when part of that division of responsibility is one of the best ways to get started. And I think that one doesn't come as such a foreign concept, I think, to parents as it does letting your kids decide whether and how much they're going to eat. So many parents, that's just a scary concept. And so if you can start off with that schedule, it starts to build the trust that the kid knows they're going to get fed regularly. And then from there, you can start to then implement those other parts of it.
And I think just to finish, like, one of the things is it's got to be somewhat genetic. We know that it is, in terms some people are hungry in the morning, some people are hungry in the afternoon. Like Alfie in the morning he eats so much food, it's ludicrous. You just think it can't be right. He'll have like 2 Weetabix, he'll have a piece of toast, he'll have like a bowl of fruit, and then he'll have something before. That's like in the first 2 hours of him being awake. But he doesn't eat a lot of dinner. So we're like, it's okay. Like, that's fine. Like like you said, that it's innate that you're getting enough. Where my youngest, not that keen on breakfast, but anything after that, she just goes mental all day.
Yeah. And that's so important to understand, that our kids are very different than us, and they're very different than each other. And so that's where this part of make sure the meal is offered. If they want to eat, cool. If they don't want to eat, fine. But they need to know that they don't get, 30 minutes later, they don't get to change their mind and say, yeah, I think I'll have something else to eat. It's like, no, these are your feeding times.
Yep.
And you need to, when it's time to eat, it's your responsibility to take that seriously, take that job seriously, which is feed yourself enough. And I'm going to make sure that as a parent that you're going to have enough. Your job's to eat enough, just like it's your job to pick up your, to do your homework, to pick up your room, to go to the bathroom when you have to pee, all those kinds of things. It's just another one of those responsibilities. And when you start to do that, and when they start to understand that, oh yeah, they're serious, then that's when those changes can start. And it really smooths things out for you.
No, I think that's brilliant. I had a couple of things at the end about best practices or what to do, but I think we've talked about so much. Yeah. There's so much that I've personally spoken to as someone that works in this industry as a nutritionist as well. So I know that people listening are definitely going to take a lot from it. And I could have this conversation go for another few hours, and I think we could fill it quite comfortably.
No, that was excellent, mate. Thank you. All the advice given was very practical, great takeaways. And I'm sure not only, as James mentioned, we got so much out of it, and I'm sure all the parents and our extended families and friends will get so much value from this as well. So I'm sure you'll get a shit ton of Aussie followers after this.
So
where can people find you? Have amazing content on your social media, so I'll be first to send people there. But where can people find you?
Instagram is probably where I'm most active. And actually, for a while, we were moving into a new house, so I wasn't very much, but I am again. But you can find me there at Jeff Ash Fitness. And so you can find me on Instagram, and I try and share something each day related to what we talked about here. And I try and keep it real practical. I don't do the funny little reels. I don't do the cutesy skits. That's just not me. So if that's what you're looking for, then you won't find that. But if you're just looking for some good information, I like to break things down. I may reference studies, but I try and keep it real practical there. And then you can also check out my website, which is hopedrivesme.com. And that's where you can drop me an email or a message. You can also message me on Instagram. And I do our podcast that I do weekly with another nutritionist, MNU nutritionist, Rebecca Heald. It's called Transform Your Nutrition. And we talk about child nutrition, intuitive eating, other related concepts and topics, just a little bit different take on things. And so, so you can check those out. Oh, and one thing I will say is if you go to my profile on LinkedIn, Instagram, I do have a link to one of the client resources that I give my clients, and I've made that available free. And it's about a 50-minute, so it's pretty detailed overview of everything we talked about here, where I break it down much more detail, and I even go into some of the underlying principles, which I found that a lot of the guys out there, so many people in this space that talk about child nutrition are women. And I think a lot of us dads can be a little bit, it doesn't resonate with us in the same way. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to do there more, is that, if any women are listening and your husband hasn't been, or partner hasn't been interested, maybe pass that along, because it's me talking, another dude talking about child nutrition and how important it is. And so maybe that will help them get on board too.
No, that's perfect. I can't thank you enough, Jeff. I really enjoyed that. And thank you for, obviously it's probably 9:15 p.m. in Texas right now.
Yep,
it
is. Yeah, I am.
Thank you very much for coming on, mate. And I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.